When you're making games, you are eventually going to hit a point where you have to do something along the lines of proper project management. And this is going to apply whether you're making the game on your own, but it's going to be even more important if you are making a game with a group of people that has lots of moving parts and dependencies between different things and so on. So my aim with this video is to show you how I use Trello and why I use it. So I'm going to start off with the method by just showing you what I would do, and then I'm going to explain the methodology a little bit after by talking about why we do it that way and why Trello is used that way, and kind of what project management methodology Trello falls into, because Trello is just a software platform. The way we use it is Kanban methodology, which is a slightly different thing. But I'm going to start off with what you should do and then get into the why you should do it afterwards, because I know, you know, people's attention spans, you want to get straight onto, you know, colorful screens with shapes moving around on them rather than me just talking to the camera for ages. So that's where we're going to start off with. And just to give you a bit of context, I'm in a team at the moment that are taking part in the Fix Your Hearts or Die David Lynch themed game jam that's over on Itch. So if that's something that interests you, I'll drop a link to it in the description. It's only going on until like the middle of February this year, so this is going to go out of date pretty quick, but I'm going to be using some of my tasks from that game in order to build this Trello board, and that should kind of, you know, make this feel like a real example. So when you load up Trello and you get what it calls a basic board like this is the standard format for what we call Kanban boards. You will see Kanban boards in other software as well. You can do Kanban within Jira, you can do Kanban within Notion, and it is really the idea of taking tasks that need to be done and physicalizing them into cards that can move left to right across these boards, right? The way that this template board is set up gives you most of what you need. Now, I am going to add some caveats to this later, because I think there are some situations where having more than 3 columns is helpful. But the idea is that when you have tasks, they begin in the to-do column, which means that no one is doing them. They move into the doing column, which means someone is doing them, and at this point you should know who they are because they're tagged on it. And then when they're done, they go to done. That's it. That's pretty self-explanatory. Now, it's kind of a little bit fiddly to delete these. I have to archive them, so that we start with a totally blank board that's representative of starting a new project. And you can see like cards can have images on and stuff like that, which can be really helpful. And you can make cards with checklists. So as I work through my own tasks, I'm going to be adding these as relevant. So one of the things that I'm doing on the current project is level design, create initial drafts for key locations. We're making an RPG Maker game. Now you'll notice that this says create initial drafts. That is what the task is. The task is not do all the level design work in the entire game. These need to be relatively granular, because if you have these big tasks that just say do all the level design, then that card is never going to get done. So you need ways of breaking things down. You either need to break them down into individual cards for subtasks or tasks with a checklist, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to add a checklist, and I'm just going to copy some items from Discord. I'll add an item, library. Right, so this means that we can have this task of kind of completing an initial draft of all the places as a single card, but it still gives us an ability to track which things have been done. So that's kind of an option that you have, but you still have to make some judgment calls about, you know, is it better to have a task like this, which is do the initial level design for all these places, or is it better to have a task for each? And this is one of the things that you will only know as your to-do list starts to fill up with stuff. Jessica's house, Jane's apartment, and we're so early into this project, I don't know who Jessica or Jane are at this point. I don't know. Might look like a long list of like places to make, but they're not going to be like fully simulated places where you can go in every room. They're going to be more like sets. You know, we are making something sort of Twin Peaksy, sort of soap opera-y, so we don't need to make a full working town. These are just places where the narrative designer feels we might have some key scenes happening. And that's why my first task is just to draft out the main areas very, very roughly, as if they are sort of kind of stages That's just to give you an idea of a type of card you can create, right? So level design, create initial drafts for key locations, and you can see it has checklists there. And I am currently working on this, so it should be in the doing stage. And I can add myself to this as a member. You can see the other members aren't on here yet. And then that becomes part of the information you can see when you look at the main board. You can see the initials or the icon or whatever someone has set of who is doing the thing. Now, this is one of the important things about Kanban, which is what Trello is. It's like Trello is a brand, Kanban is an actual system. One person has ownership and authority over each card, and this is the difference between a method and a methodology. You can follow a method and do everything that someone else does. If you don't understand the kind of underlying rules and logic of that system, you're going to run foul of some issues. And one of the ones with Kanban is that you really need to have one person per card, right? So let's say that you have a job that's shared between people. Let's say we have just to give you a really obvious example, let's say we make a task like this that's level design and environmental art, and we've got someone on our team who is a level designer and someone who is an environmental artist. They cannot both own this task. So what you really need to do is break that out into 2 tasks and then assign them to each person. Why? Because if 2 people are accountable for something, then no one is accountable for it. And it's much better to have a clear owner of that thing. At least in this system, that's how that works. So I'm just going to start populating this to-do list with things that I'm generally aware that we need to do to get this game done in the next 3 or so weeks. And I'll probably speed this up, and I'll be doing this in a very rough way to start off with, and then I'll go back and show it to the team and get them to kind of fill out details so that we have a kind of more full picture of all the work that needs doing. But I'm just going to start off with things like, right, key scenes. So I've created this task that says environments, review drafts and identify additional tiles, objects needed. So you can already start to see some dependencies here, right? This is a task that is based on, this task is based on the initial drafts of the key locations in the level design. So this environments one shouldn't be ever in the doing stack at the same time as this one, because it's based on this one being complete. So I'm going to leave this over here for now. And another thing you can do, which is really helpful when you're working with sort of artists and designers and visual people, is you can start adding work in progress images to these cards. So I can upload a cover image to the card. Where's it gone? And now that character art creating the main portraits actually has an image of some of the work in progress on it. And really how much you use that feature of adding kind of key art to cards is up to you, but I find it can be really helpful to make this less daunting to look at. And especially, you know, if you've got different sorts of people on your team and you've got a lot of people that are very visual, it can be very helpful to have visual aids on here. The other thing to think about is you can put things into categories which will put a little colored tag on here. You know, for example, I know this combat create demo of system is a me job, right? So I can add myself to it and then everyone can see that that's what I'm working on because it's got that little sort of cyan blue icon for me. I don't know why it's called me JJ. Not JJ anywhere. But let's say that you have a kind of category of work like artwork and more than one person is doing it. So what I would do here is create a label. So we can create a label and we can put something into a category. So I'm going to create a label for art, which I think is going to be green. And I'll call this visual art. And that's going to just be a broad label for anything that is done by an artist, right? And then it adds this green tag here. Another thing you can do, which is helpful if you've got any colorblind people on your team, yeah, you can enter colorblind friendly mode and it also gives you like a texture to go with that. It adds another thing to be able to quickly recognize the cards by. So I'm just going through, and anything that is an art task is going to become green, and anything that is writing, I'm going to make blue. Again, and I'm just using these colors to indicate the broad category of the thing. And what this means is if we end up with a to-do list that has loads and loads of green tasks in for art, then when the artists come on here and they're working out what to do, they can just look for green stuff and they know that they're looking in the right area. Now, in terms of how you use this on a day-to-day basis, the point of the Kanban system is it is intended for teams where people are capable of managing their own work. So that kind of means that, let's say I am on the art team, I'm someone doing these art tasks. I log in at the start of my shift or whenever I'm working on this, I check the Trello board, I look here and I see there are green tasks. And if I look at these and I can understand what to do and no one's claimed them yet, I can move one across into doing, assign myself to it and start working on it straight away. But this is where it all comes down to like how well you use the system, because create main sprites might need more information, right? It might need some information here about how big the sprites are, what the color palette is, and all of that kind of stuff. And I do have that information, but I'm not going to add it live right now because it's going to take forever. The system is designed so that people working on your team, or yourself, if you are just doing this on your own, can quickly see what needs to be done and quickly move things across and go, right, this is what I'm focusing on today. But you need to give them the tools to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to do that if you have poorly written specifications for tasks. And this is another reason why it's better to get these granular and break them down into lots of smaller subtasks if you can, or lists. Because, again, if you have a massive task that is like, create all the characters, and it's like, well, what does that mean? What type of art am I making for the characters? What I've done here, at least, is I've created a separate task for their close-up portraits, a separate task for their the close-ups, which are like full screen images that we might do to show kind of more cinematic moments, and then there's sprites, which is for when they're walking around in the world. This is breaking it up on one level. If we had like hundreds of characters, we might have to break it down even more, right? We might say, oh, there's a task to create the sprites for the characters who are indoors and a task to create the sprites for the characters who are outdoors, whatever. But the point is that the more granular this is, the easier it is for people to pick tasks and kind of get on with something without having to kind of raise too many questions and query what they're doing. I said at the start that this setup of a Kanban board is fine for most instances, right? When you have to do, doing, and done, you have most of the things you need. And one of the kind of general rules of Kanban is that people can only ever be doing one thing. So in this middle stack, you should usually have the least amount of cards because it's what people are currently working on. And if someone is telling you they're working on 3 things, then they're basically lying, because they're either working on one of those things and ignoring the others for a while, or they're sort of jumping between them in an unfocused way. And that's something that generally we want to avoid. So try to have a rule that people have 1, maybe 2 at maximum things in the doing stack at any given time. What this also helps with is communication between the team, because if I go on here and I'm trying to work out what, you know, Gary the programmer is doing, because I want to see if Gary is free to help me with something, and Gary is listed as doing 5 things, then I don't actually know which of those things Gary is working on, and one of them might be really important and the others might be things that he could put aside for a minute. So the way that you assign your tasks on here and the way that you indicate what you're currently doing in that middle column is really important for your team. It's also important for yourself because it just kind of is you basically declaring what you were focusing on for that day or that session or whatever. This is another thing that's good about using the lists, right? Because I can go in here and I can say, in my level design task, I have made the initial draft for the library, and I've made an initial draft for this area called the industrial district, and they're ticked off now. Let's say tomorrow I'm not doing level design. That means I can move this back into the to-do list. You know, if I was working on the demo of the combat system, then I can make it clear to the rest of the team that that is what I'm focused on now. And yeah, I've done 2 out of 15 of these level design tasks, but I'm not doing them currently. That can be really helpful. Again, this software, the role of this methodology is about communicating what you're currently doing to the rest of the team, and that is going to make it easier for them to understand, oh, we're working on the same thing today. Oh, maybe now is an ideal time to ask you that question that I have about that, or whatever. Now, I do have some caveats about this kind of 3-tiered thing. One thing is, what happens in order for something to move from doing to done, right? And what does that even mean? So let's say I do this task, combat, create demo of combat system, and I decide it's done, right? I just think, oh, that's done, and I move it over here. Now, what does that actually mean? That means that me as the individual worker has kind of decided that is done. But am I actually the sign-off person for this thing? Do I need to check with other people working on the game that this is how they want that thing to work? And that's why in this case, I think it's good to have another list called in review. And this can be particularly helpful if you have lots of elements of your game that need to go through lots of people. And it can also be quite helpful if you've got very junior members of your team where, you know, they might not feel totally comfortable signing off their own work, or you might want to just make sure that it's done properly before they get to sign it off. So in this model, we have the big to-do list of everything we're doing in the game. Then we have what everyone is currently doing right now on the doing. Remember, no more than 1 or 2 tasks each, otherwise it gets confusing and unhelpful. And then instead of taking tasks straight to done, we put them in a stack called in review. And that means that basically, let's say that someone else's job is to review my combat system and say whether they feel it's appropriate for the game. They can now see from the Trello that, you know, this is waiting for them to look at it. And then we can move it to done after that kind of stage of review has been done, right? So I think generally having these 4 categories and having an in review stage can be really helpful in lots of situations. It can be helpful if you're working with a new team where it's unclear how you work together. It can be helpful if you are working with some very junior people or students and you want to make sure that, you know, people just don't go, yeah, finish that, get out of the way, and actually it's not done to standard. Having this 4th column for in review can be really helpful for that. Another situation where I might add another column is if you are working on a very long project, like something that takes months or years, then I would put a stage in between to do and doing. And I would use to do as my backlog. And by backlog, I basically mean every task that we have to do to finish the game forever. I would create a to-do list as well. And then what this allows you to do is sort of a bit less like Kanban and a little bit more like something we would do in Agile Scrum. And then what you can do then is you can have a meeting every sprint, every week or 2 weeks, and you can sort of take all of the tasks that you currently want to focus on, move them into to do. And then you've got a distinction, right, between the backlog, which is everything we need to do to finish the game, which will be probably your longest list, and instead of going straight from that and putting things into doing, you can have a kind of list of here are the priorities right now, and people can pick from that list, that to-do list, and it kind of creates a sort of short-term priority, long-term to-do list kind of situation. I wouldn't do it for this project I'm working on because it's only a month long, but I think in the case of this project, because I am working with people that I'm unfamiliar with, I am going to keep this in review column here because basically, I don't want to just say that the things I'm done with are done, because it's hard to tell. We're collaborating, we're doing things where people's roles overlap. When I've made this combat system, then people are going to want to know, like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? So we need to have this way of indicating that, hey, this is waiting for other people to look at it, other people to kind of sign it off and so on. That's why I would use these kind of 4 columns in the game that we're currently building. And that is it, really, is kind of you make cards. Their movement from left to right indicates how complete those tasks are on the cards. And you can even potentially use like the other axis, like the vertical axis, to indicate importance, like the stuff that you want to do next, sort of make sure it's filtered to the top of this list. Those are the sorts of things you just need to agree with, either in your own head or as part of your team. I think the important thing as well here to understand is that this is a production tool. And when we talk about production and what a producer does in video games, we're talking about a project manager. And okay, you will occasionally meet producers in games that have input into creative stuff and make decisions about things. But by and large, the role of a producer is a project manager. It's like, what are we doing and when are we doing it and who is doing that stuff? A producer is one of the most annoying job titles in all of the media industries because it means totally different things, from music to film to theatre to games. But in games, it generally means the person who knows the timeline, the person who has the big list of tasks, and the person who knows who does what and who is free to do what. So when you're doing this kind of work, you are doing production, you are acting as a producer. And it may be that you have someone on your team that sort of owns the Kanban board on Trello and it is doing the production, or it may be something distributed among your team. And that is just something worth bearing in mind, because if you are doing lots of team projects in your game dev, or you're doing lots of little game jams with friends and you're doing work like this, then you have relevant work experience to become a producer. So kind of bear that in mind as well. If you want to get into it in a little bit more depth, then I would advise you look up Kanban as a methodology and read about that. I would also advise you look up Agile Scrum as a methodology, because these are different ways of managing a project. They are both in the category of agile production methodologies, but they are, slightly different from each other. And then there's something in the middle called Scrumban, which merges them together. I'm not going to go into those in detail now. I don't know if I ever will on this channel, because it bores the hell out of me. But if you find this, if you have a go at doing this and you find this somehow, something that you get on with well, and you find yourself kind of fitting into this role in the project you do, then it is worth maybe reading up more about production methodologies, because it may be an area of game dev that you could find roles in or do more of in the future. Hello, I hope you found this little informational video useful and informative. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you like what I do here and you'd like to support it, giving just $1 a month on Patreon or a YouTube channel membership can be really helpful. If you subscribe at one of the higher tiers, you do get access to the Indie Game Clinic Discord, which is a closed community of people who have been developing games for a long time, or people who are just in the process of learning things. It's a really nice place to meet other game developers, post your progress, and get helpful game design and creative feedback on what you're doing. I think myself and other members of that community have found that because there is a little bit of a barrier to entry, everyone in that Discord is someone whose game has been on my show or someone who has subscribed via Patreon. It does make for a really productive community, because everyone there is either making games or genuinely interested in learning how to make games instead of asking questions that they could ask to Google. So if you want to support the channel, that's a really nice way to do so. And if you can't, then telling other people about it by word of mouth, sharing links is great. Or if you look on my channel homepage, you can buy some of my merch, which mainly revolves around me making silly little in-jokes about indie games and making them and how it's hard and stuff like that. Lots of ways you can support the channel. Please do, because then I can carry on doing stuff like this and putting it out free on YouTube, instead of being one of those people that sells courses, which I don't ever want to do. Thanks.